fake money, fake teachers, fake assets. In 1971, President Richard Nixon took the U.S. dollar off the gold standard, turning the U.S. dollar into fiat money, government money, fake money. In 2008, the world economy crashed when fake assets, fake mortgages, and fake financial experts led us down a path to ruin. Think about this. Why do schools choose not to teach us about money? Why are 78% of all Americans living paycheck to paycheck? Why are students staggering under $1 trillion in student loan debt? Because a fake world makes the rich richer and the poor and middle class poorer, and that's exactly how the government wants it. The only way to protect yourself is to learn how to separate the real from the fake. Go to richdad.com to get your copy of Fake by Robert Kiyosaki and learn how to spot the manipulation of reality we live with every day. Don't get fooled again. Get your copy of Fake by Robert Kiyosaki at richdad.com. That's richdad.com.
This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello. It's Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And today we're going to be talking about business and startups and all that stuff. And I think the big question for today's program is really, how much is enough? That's the big question today. How much is enough? And if you're in the financial markets like I am most of the time, the big word that drives most of Wall Street nuts is a word called growth. They're always talking about growth. And by the way, they define the word recession as negative growth. So there's this obsession with growth, but also for many men is how much is how much is big? Is big enough? And all this other stuff. And I think it drives people crazy. I think the big thing that Kim and I are happy about is that, how much is enough, but do you have to be really rich to be rich? So it's going to be an interesting discussion. Our guest today is Paul Jarvis. He's a designer and author. He's the author of the book Company of One, Why Staying Small is the Next Big Thing for Business. So for all of you there who want to be a startup and want to start the next Amazon or Apple or Google, you don't really have to do that. And Kim and I are living proof of that, right, Kim?
We are. I mean, we didn't have our plan. Let's talk about our investment plan. Our plan was to be financially free. And financially free meant we had more money coming in than was going out.
Yep.
It wasn't to be a mega millionaire. It wasn't to be a billionaire. Actually, none of our goals were money driven. They were always mission driven. But financial freedom was huge for us. So one of the things I want to say is so many people never start because their goal is so big and monumental that they don't know where to begin, and so they just never start.
Well, remember that yo-yo from business school, this young kid? Yeah. He talked about BHAG.
BHAG.
BHAG. We got to have a BHAG. He comes in to consult me. This kid has never started a business. His mother was still washing his ears, I think. And what was a BHAG, Kim?
BHAG was big, hairy, audacious goal.
And we looked at him, and here we are. We already started the Rich Dad company. He goes, "You need a BHAG." And I said, "God, we're already a global company. How much bigger do you want to be?" "No, you need a big BHAG now." So I think we're paying him $20,000 a session or something, and that was his consulting to us. But anyway, you don't have to be big to be rich and all this. And that funny thing too is the person that brought it in was our ex-partner. And Kim and I just had very small goals. It was $120,000 a year. Now, for a lot of people, that sounds like a lot of money, and it really is. But it's not like a lot of money. It's not like billions. So our partner says, "Is that all you guys make? Is $120,000 a year?" And what did you say, Kim? I said, "Yeah, I mean."
Well,
to her, that wasn't enough money.
Yeah, but what I said was that's $10,000 a month coming in every month, but our living expenses were $3,000 a month. So right now we are financially free. And this was back in 96, 97.
Yeah, but to her, she was shocked. She says, "How can you live on only $120,000 a year?" Well, number one, it was called passive income. It was income from real estate, which meant we had no tax on it. So it was $120,000 clear. And her husband's was $350,000 a year, but it was ordinary income. It was income you had to pay tax on, and you had to bust your butt every day. So, ladies and gentlemen, for a lot of people that go, 120,000, man, I'm only making 80,000 a year. It's not that. A lot of it is just how you plan on it. How smart are you? You don't have to make a lot of money to be free, to be rich, and all this. In fact, the old Chinese proverb goes, a wealthy man is a man who has enough. And that's all Kim and I defined on how much was enough. So for us, 120,000 a year, 10,000 a month, tax-free was enough. Right, Kim?
That was enough at that point.
Yeah, and it's wonderful. So anyway, our guest today is Paul Jarvis. He's going to be the author of the book Company of One, Why Staying Small is the Next Big Thing for Business. I think that's a great idea for you just starting up. So welcome to the program, Paul.
Welcome, Paul.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
So why did you write this book, Company of One, Why Staying Small is the Next Big Thing for Business? What's your motivation? Because there's a lot of work to write a book.
It definitely is, and it's a few years of research and planning and work. But I really wanted people to, and exactly what both of you were just talking about for a few minutes, is that I think a lot of people see business as working in a certain way where you always have to be growing and bigger is always better. And I've worked for myself for 20 years and I've never found that to be the case. I found that better is better. More isn't better. They would be the same word if they meant the same thing. And so I wanted to write a book that showed people, not necessarily that growth is bad, because I don't think growth is bad, but just that growth can be questioned and we can determine what growth makes sense or not for ourselves. And I think it was both of you who have talked about this for a long time. Having a purpose and having a mission is so important in business because that mission can help us figure out, hey, does this growth line up with my mission? Does this growth line up with my purpose? And if it doesn't, then we can just say no to it, and that's perfectly okay.
So, in your life, have you run into people who are obsessed about growth and all that?
Definitely, all the time.
So who do you run into? Because that sounds to me more like, because I read the financial magazines and watch Financial Bubble Vision, and growth is their favorite word. Growth is their favorite word. That's all they talk about. But I think that's a corporate, stock-driven, PE ratio type mentality that's driving that, because it's not in my thought pattern. So who do you run into with this word growth? For
me, because I work in tech and I do a lot in the startup world, venture capital works fairly similar to that, where they need to see, they're looking for the next unicorn, the next company that they can turn into $1 billion business that IPOs.
Yeah, the trouble with the problem with most unicorns is they have $1 billion valuation, but they got no income and they got no assets.
Exactly. Saying something is worth $1 billion and something actually being worth $1 billion, very, very different.
It's one of the strangest things I've ever seen, that a company with nothing can be called a billion, could be called a unicorn, because it's got $1 billion valuation that some person said is worth $1 billion. That's amazing. Yeah. What a world we live in. That is amazing.
I know. And not all businesses have to work towards those goals as well. Like my business doesn't need to make $1 billion. It doesn't need to make nearly that to be successful, to be profitable.
So, Paul, we're talking about, how do you determine enough? What is your definition, or how do you determine, or how does somebody determine what enough is for them?
Yeah, and it's different for everybody, but I do think that determining enough is kind of the counterbalance or antithesis of this unchecked growth. So for me, I just like to think, if I'm a small business and my business is one or a few people, then enough is the business has to be profitable, one, because it's a business, so it needs to generate profit. But it also needs to cover our life and a comfortable life. And I don't need a lot to be comfortable in my life, but I just need to generate enough revenue. And I think because it's different for everyone, it depends on where you live, how many kids you have, all of that. But if we don't determine that, then we're always chasing more, and more is something we can never reach. More is a line on the horizon that we can run towards, and we're going to get sweaty and need to drink some water, but we're never going to get there.
So you're basically saying you gotta question for yourself, what is how does your life and business interact together?
Exactly. Otherwise, you're always going to be wanting more. Otherwise, you're going to be forsaking happiness in the present for hopefully being happier later when you have more. For most people, more isn't even defined. It's just, I just want more, and it's
Right.
more stuff, more income, more revenue, more employees.
Right. And then you say, well, for example, like Airbnb. So Airbnb, they couldn't stay too small. If they had, as you said, 2 houses listed on Airbnb website, they're out of business. So the scale has to be relative to the mission and the goals of the company.
Exactly. The purpose of the business should drive the size of it in the market. And I think every business should grow and requires growth to reach its right organic size in the market. Ricardo Semler has written a ton about this as well, where businesses need to grow and they need to reach a good organic size, but then they don't actually need to keep growing past that. They can optimize for where they're at. So yeah, Airbnb, if they had 2 properties, they wouldn't be a business. But for myself, for the businesses that I run, I don't need 10 or 1,000 employees. I don't need millions or billions of dollars in revenue to be profitable or to have enough. I can make things work for the size that it needs to be.
It's a great message. For me, it's kind of interesting that you even wrote the book, because I don't disagree with you. I have never understood corporate guys. They always talked about growth or unicorns. I'm going, it doesn't fit my mentality. But I will say this much. There's another disease other than just growth and all that. It's called consumerism. And what happens for a lot of people, if they make a buck, they spend 10. They buy a bigger house, a nicer car. I know so many people, like we have a person who works for us, and she, going through college, she was a teller at a bank. And she said it was the most shocking things to sit there, because she could see the statement, the bank statement of the person in front of them. And they had this huge Mercedes SUV and the big house, and they didn't have 2 pennies to rub together. So she says, here they walk into the bank dripping in bling, got the Mercedes, they got an SUV, got a big house in Boca Raton, and they got nothing in the bank. That's another disease, right?
It is. And there's, especially with social media now, there's a lot of people who are fake rich, where their social media feeds show the nice cars or the nice houses or the fancy clothes. And that doesn't, I don't think consumer debt doesn't photograph well for Instagram. So that's not what's being shown. But then as people who are consuming that media, we see, oh, well, everybody else is doing so well, and everybody else are buying all of these things, and everybody else are spending all this money, so maybe I should too. And I think that's it boggles my mind, because I would, like, for myself, I would rather spend less than I make every month. And I think there's this thing where as we start to earn more money, which tends to happen in our career path, if we keep spending more money as we're earning more money, we're not actually making more money. It's kind of on par.
Yeah.
Sometimes it outpaces itself.
And Paul, you make a good point too in your book, because you talk about oftentimes growth seems like the easier route. So you want more customers, spend more money, throw more money at it. You want more revenue, spend more. You want a bigger support team, go buy them. So it's always like just throw money or throw growth at the problem. And where you're saying you can do today with technology and all, you can do a whole lot more with less. And actually that takes a little more creativity.
It does. More is always the easiest answer in business to solve any problems, whereas it's not always the smartest. Like sometimes maybe growth doesn't make sense, or growth can be. It's funny in writing the book, all of the research, all of the studies, all of the data that I found didn't line up with this kind of tired business advice that more is better and we need rapid growth. And if we think about rapid growth in any other context, it's pretty much that's what cancer is. But in the business world, it's thought of as something that's amazing. But in biology or in anything else, it's like we need to check this, because this isn't necessarily the best thing.
That's very, very good information and advice. Once again, we're talking to Paul Jarvis. He's a designer and author. He's worked with clients such as Microsoft, Mercedes-Benz, Marie Forleo, and Warner Music. Paul's weekly newsletter is called The Sunday Dispatches, and he's the author of a brand new book just released, Company of One, Why Staying Small is the Next Big Thing for Business. It's very good advice today, but it's more than just for business people. It's also for people. Like this. My new book is coming out, Fake, and there's a lot of fake rich out there. There's a lot of those guys. That's funny. So anyway, when we come back, we'll be talking more to Paul about, what you can do to stay small and still live happily. What's enough for you.
And we can also touch on what are the 4 traits of a typical company, for one, because the traits that Paul talks about, to me, are the traits of any successful person.
You're listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show with Robert Kiyosaki.
Don't be like Charlie. Charlie is that do-it-yourselfer who does himself in. Do-it-yourself is good for tile and grout. It is not good for asset protection. Charlie thought he'd save a few dollars forming his LLC online. With no guidance, he did it wrong. When he sold the property, he lost thousands and thousands of dollars. He did himself in by trying to do it himself. Don't burn yourself. Use Corporate Direct to set up and maintain your LLCs and corporations. Corporate Direct is owned and operated by attorney and rich dad advisor Garrett Sutton. Garrett wrote the bestsellers Loopholes of Real Estate and Start Your Own Corporation. He is Robert Kiyosaki's attorney for asset protection. He and his team will do it right. Visit them at corporatedirect.com or call 800-600-1760. Mention Rich Dad and receive $100 off your formation fee. That's corporatedirect.com, corporatedirect.com.
What is your number one expense in life? Your number one expense. It's taxes. And I've asked the question is, how come there's no financial education in school, but why isn't there education on taxes either? They tell you to save money, which is stupid. They tell you to invest in the stock market, which is stupid. But won't they teach you about taxes? So here we have Rich Dad advisor Tom Wheelwright. We're talking about his revision for his book, Tax-Free Wealth. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Robert.
So what's the tax-free wealth about? What's different this time? It's a revised edition.
Well, so what we did was this is the first major tax reform we've had in 30 years, 2017.
Was 86 was the last one?
86 was the last one, back when I was in Washington, D.C.
So many guys got wiped out because of that tax change.
They did. They did. It wiped out an entire industry, savings and loans. This new tax law is just as big, but in a very different way. It affects different industries. The tax law is always a series of incentives. And the question is always which incentives and which ones apply to me. And so the key to revising tax-free wealth was, what changed so much in this new tax law that we can absolutely take advantage of? Seriously, the amazing incentives. For example, the bonus depreciation, for example, for real estate is unbelievable. You buy a $1 million apartment, get a $300,000 deduction or more the very first year.
So if you want to make more money and pay less taxes like Donald Trump and myself, get Tom's book, Tax-Free Wealth.
Log on to richdadradio.com while you listen. Now back to Robert Kiyosaki.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And for all of you that think about starting your own business or just getting started in business, very important show. You can listen to the Rich Dad Radio program anytime, anywhere on iTunes or Android. And all of our programs are archived at richdadradio.com. That means you can go back, go to richdadradio.com, and you can listen to this program again. It's especially important, this program, if you're sitting in your 9-to-5 job and you think, well, I'm going to start a business. Well, I would definitely listen to this program again, then get together with friends, family, and possible business partner, and your attorney, hopefully, and then discuss this radio program, because a lot of people get into business for goofy reasons. And, it's like they walk into the swamp and get eaten by the alligators. I've done that a number of times. So anyway, this is a very important program. Our guest today is Paul Jarvis. He's the author of The Company of One, Why Staying Small is the Next Best Thing for Business. And Kim and I agree, you can stay small. The idea is start small and survive.
Start
and survive.
Yes.
Most people don't survive, and they have these goofy ideas. Like we were talking about our business partner, she says, you guys only make $120,000 a year. I said, yeah, but that's $120,000 without working. But that's not enough money. And we don't pay taxes on the $120,000. You avoiding taxes? And they were making about $350,000 a year, but they were in the S quadrant, the E, S, B, and the I in the cash flow quadrant, and they were paying 50% in taxes. So we were netting the same, but we were netting the same without working. So there's a lot to learn before you start one up. So anyway, our guest today is Paul Jarvis. And Paul, welcome back to the Rich Dad Radio Show. So what do you recommend for somebody starting up?
I think that you need to focus on generating profit as quickly as possible. I think a lot of times we think, oh, we need to spend money to make money, or we need to get investors or that sort of thing to.
It's called ego,
to build a business.
ego. And more money will solve the problem, and it doesn't. It makes it worse most of the time.
Exactly. So I think, especially if we're starting out, I think we need to figure out what's the smallest way that we can start, and how can we start to generate revenue as quickly as possible. And then if growth makes sense, if scale makes sense at that point, when we are in fact making money and profitable, then let's do that. But if in the beginning, if we figure out what's the smallest version of the thing I want to do that can generate income, then that sets us up to be in a great place.
I know there's a whole saying that goes, nobody went broke making a small profit. But a lot of people have gone broke chasing more money.
And Paul, you also say, your book is called Company of One, and you say Company of One it's not anti-growth, and it's not anti-revenue, and it's not just one person necessarily. So what's the difference of what makes a Company of One different?
I think that the way that I would define a Company of One is a business that questions growth. It doesn't just assume that success, that the byproduct of success is growth. And we can even talk about the traits that I see companies of one having, and they could be a business of one person, or in the book there's a bunch of business examples where there's 30 to 50 people, but they definitely all have certain traits in common.
So one of the traits you talk about that I embrace is resilience, and you describe resilience as the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. Is that one of the traits?
Yeah, it is. And I think there's a study done by Dean Becker who found that resilience is actually the most useful thing for business success, more than education, more than training, more than experience. And like you said, resilience requires having a sense of purpose or a mission, because sometimes things can go wrong, but you can still work towards that mission. It involves accepting reality, because we don't have control over as much as we think we do in life and work and anything. And then the third thing in resilience is just the ability to adapt. Markets change, consumer change, businesses change, competition changes. So we just have to have the ability to adapt. I mean, we've all been in business for quite a while, and business doesn't work the same now as it did 20 years ago or more. So just having the ability to figure out what we need to do in order to keep things going. And that's harder to do if you're a huge business. It's hard for big businesses to pivot or to move quickly in any direction.
Yeah, there's another thing that really jams a lot of people. We have a really good friend. If you want to play the stock market game, you go into what's called the acquisition phase. And you go up there and you buy other companies, make your balance sheet look bigger. And I always find that very, very interesting, because they can't even run their own company, but they go and buy another company. Now you have two things you can't operate, you have no control over. And I see it all the time, and it just kind of cracks me up. So anyway, you can talk about resilience. You can also talk about stupidity. There is no scarcity of stupidity out there when it comes to the subject of money. So I think the biggest question of all, what Kim and I operate is, how much is enough? How much do you need to just survive and go for that? I've always said to people, if you want to be financially free, you don't need a 401k, you need a fourplex. You got 4 units, you live in one, rent 3. I mean, it's not that hard to do.
I think, and
you're financially free.
Yeah, and the key is to start. We always say start small. Yeah. Whether it's business, whether it's investing, start small, because you got to start. You got to get in the game.
Start me up. But so many people are afraid of failing, which is really a tragedy, because fear can be good, but not if it paralyzes you. So, Paul, what else would you have to say for somebody who is thinking about starting up, or what other, to me is just have a simple plan, like buy a fourplex. It ain't that hard. Fourplexes, when Kim and I started out, were $80,000, and then you didn't need $1 million in your 401k. So it's just so simple. It shocks me that more people don't do it. You had a fourplex, you could quit your job. That's priceless.
Well, there was a Gallup World study done, and I think they looked at, and they were trying to see what the optimum level of income was for happiness, which I found really, really interesting. I think they talked to about 2 million people across 150 countries, and they found that more money did equal more happiness, but only up to a certain point. It was like a bell curve where if people were earning, like you said, if people were earning around 100K and they were covering their necessities, they were covering long-term goals in investing and planning, if they made more than that, they weren't necessarily happy or more content with their life. They were actually more stressed out. They were more likely to chase material possessions and have these unhealthy social comparisons that we were talking about. And a lot of times they would end up spending more. I think it's fascinating that so many people think about the top number, like the gross revenue in a business or the pre-tax income that you make, when a lot of people don't think about the expenses or don't think about, hey, if I make the exact same amount of money but spend less in my life, I therefore have more money to work with. Or in business, if I have the same amount of gross revenue that I'm generating, but my business spends less because we're smaller, because we're leaner, because we're not taking on other financial risks, then we can make more money by generating the same amount of revenue, which I think is so smart to do, to think not just about that top number, but how we can affect the bottom number as well.
Well, let me ask you this, because when you talk about, company of one and starting small or staying small, there's a social stigma out there. And small isn't cool. Small's not sexy. Small doesn't satisfy a lot of ego. And isn't there a lot of pressure to go big and to grow? I mean, the social stigma out there is all about go big or go home.
Sure. And I mean, I see that in my own life. I mean, I run a very small business. And if people ask me what I do and what my day looks like, as opposed to just what the business does, then yeah, I mean, it could seem like I have a less legitimate business because it's very small. But at the end of the day, like, I want to run a business that I want to run. I want to run a business that I enjoy. I want to do things like I want a business that supports my life and not a life that supports my business. And I don't have to, it doesn't really matter what other people think. Right. And I mean, a lot of people who have said, oh, you should grow. Like when my business in the 90s was doing exceptionally well, and people would tell me, oh, you need to grow. You need to hire all these people. You need to get an office. You need to do this and this. And they did that in their business, and they've gone out of business 15 years ago. And I'm still in business. I'm still running the same business as I did in the 90s. So I think that just by virtue of outlasting those people who say those sorts of things, it just ends up working out.
That's what you're saying is very, very true. More is not better. Big is not better. But anyway, it's hard. It's easier said than done because we all have different egos and different drives and different motivations. It's not that hard. It's really not that hard.
And one of the statistics, Paul, that you talk about is that 2/3 of the companies on Inc.'s fastest growing companies, and there's the word, fastest growing companies, they're out of business in 5 to 8 years later, 2/3. So do you think if these companies adopted more this thinking of being company of one and not so much growth, but what fits the person, do you think there would be less failure rate? Do you think there'd be more survival of these businesses?
Yes, definitely, because it's very hard to run a profitable business when you're running a growth-focused business. When you're running a growth-focused business, you're forsaking profit now in the hopes that you will have more profit later, which can sometimes pay off, but not all. I think it only pays off about 1/3 of the time, looking at that research study from the Kauffman Foundation. And all of the studies that I found, all of these businesses are failing not because of competition, not because of bad products, not because of the market, but because they could not sustain the resources required for their rapid growth.
It's not just for businesses. I think that's really where I'm coming back to, is that what traps a lot of people in the job to nowhere, the 9 to 5 or whatever they're doing, is that they keep spending more money. They have they make, let's say, $50,000 a year. They get a pay raise. They buy a bigger house. So it's not really just business. It's this idea that more is better. And I think one of the reasons that Kim and I are successful is very simply our highest priority was freedom. And that's why our number was $120K a year. For most people, that's undoable, unfortunately. And it's really easy to do, but in their mind, $120,000 sounds a lot, especially if they're only making $80,000 a year.
Yeah.
How would you get $120,000 without working? That's really the challenge here. It's a whole different mindset to do that.
But then there's one other piece to it, which is, we got that goal of $10,000 a month, and then it became more fun because then every time we would learn something new, and then it's like, okay, what's the next challenge? Because we love challenges. What's the next game? We love games. So then we got to build on it. The purpose wasn't to build $1 billion company. The purpose was to get financially free.
That was our first purpose, yeah.
Yep.
And the number was $120,000 a year without working, paying no taxes. And that's what Rich Dad stands for.
Yep.
Well, the story is our partner at the time just says, is that all you make? And Kim and I lived in this tiny little house. We drove used cars. And
everybody had their McMansions.
They had a big McMansion. They had the Mercedes and the stuff. They had the big corner offices. They worked in corporate. And that's more, but I don't think it's better. Yeah. Anyway, so it's a very, very good message you have here.
And I think, Paul, too, your message is very similar to our message, which is you're teaching people to be free. You want them to have the 100%. Freedom to do what they want to do.
It's called success, too.
And success. So I think we're right aligned on the
freedom
same.
to make choices.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So Paul Jarvis is author, Company One, Why Staying Small is the Next Big Thing. And Paul, good luck on your book, and please get the book and everybody read it because it's got a good message in there. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. And your website, Paul,
you
your website is pjrvs.com.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
So when we come back, going to the most popular part of our program is Ask Robert, where you get to ask us your question.
You're listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show with Robert Kiyosaki.
Don't be like Charlie. Charlie is that do-it-yourselfer who does himself in. Do-it-yourself is good for tile and grout. It is not good for asset protection. Charlie thought he'd save a few dollars forming his LLC online. With no guidance, he did it wrong. When he sold the property, he lost thousands and thousands of dollars. He did himself in by trying to do it himself. Don't burn yourself. Use Corporate Direct to set up and maintain your LLCs and corporations. Corporate Direct is owned and operated by attorney and Rich Dad advisor Garrett Sutton. Garrett wrote the bestsellers Loopholes of Real Estate and Start Your Own Corporation. He is Robert Kiyosaki's attorney for asset protection. He and his team will do it right. Visit them at corporatedirect.com or call 800-600-1760. Mention Rich Dad and receive $100 off your formation fee. That's corporatedirect.com. corporatedirect.com.
It pays to listen. Now back to Robert Kiyosaki and the Rich Dad Radio Show.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. You can listen to the Rich Dad Radio program anytime, anywhere on iTunes or Android. And all of our programs are archived at richdadradio.com. And we archive it because we're an education company. So if you listen to this program once more with Paul Jarvis, and he's the author of The Company of One, Why Staying Small is the Next Big Thing for Business. It's a very good thing to do. Listen to it again. You may learn a lot. But most importantly, if you are in business or you have friends and families, listen to it with friends, family, and business partners. Then discuss the points and merits, whether you agree or disagree. But that's how you learn. You don't learn there just sitting there taking notes. And you can submit your questions to Ask Robert at richdadradio.com. And once again, thank you to Paul Jarvis. So what's the first question, Melissa?
Our first question today comes from Emil in San Marcos, Texas. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Robert and Kim, I know you both stress the importance of being able to sell as an entrepreneur. I've been running an online business and I'm having success, but now I need to scale and seek out investors. I'm an introvert by nature and face-to-face selling isn't my strong suit. What advice do you have to learn the skill of selling?
Well, I think the first question I have is, and my first suggestion is I would get this book, Company of One, because Paul Jarvis talks about that word scale. There's such an emphasis on you have to get big to get better. And I'd agree with Paul. And the good thing about being an introvert is then you have to get creative and figure out better ways. You don't have to go face to face. Most people, I hate it. I still hate it to this day. But being a former Marine, I go through my problems. I don't hide from my problems. But for you, it might be just getting more creative, figuring out different ways to market to get attention. But if you're going to raise capital, you may have to hire somebody to raise the money for you. But before you do that, I would definitely read Paul Jarvis's book, The Company of One, because scale is you don't necessarily make money by getting bigger, right, Kim?
Yeah, and my first question would be, why do you need investors? What's the reason behind it? Is it because you cannot sell and you think that money is going to help? Because you're going to have to sell to investors. And once you bring on investors, that opens up a whole new door and a whole new set of problems and possibilities. But one thing that Paul says in his book is, he says, start out as simple as possible and always fervently question adding new layers of complexity. So bringing on investors is a new level of complexity.
Yeah, and I wouldn't recommend it, especially if you're an introvert, because you're dealing with another breed of cat when you do that.
Yeah.
So,
and if you take on somebody else's money, you got to be really
good.
adamantly responsible for that money.
Yeah,
more
we
than your
definitely
own.
would. Given what you said, I wouldn't recommend it. So I would use some lateral thinking and be creative, figure it out. Work around turn your weakness into a strength. Whereas what I did was my weakness is I couldn't sell. I just powered through it for 5 years. Then I became number one in sales, but that's not for everybody. Anyway, there's different ways, there's different strokes for different people, and keep thinking. That's the most important thing. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Wes in Bakersfield, California. Favorite book, Rich Dad's Guide to Investing. I have a small business with a 50-50 business partner. I'm happy with our current success and status of our company, but she thinks we need to bring on employees to keep growing. I have no interest in managing people, and I know that my partner won't do it, so it will fall on me anyway. What advice do you have to manage conflict with your business partner?
Don't do it. Business is conflict.
Uh-huh.
And it's like the first question. The guy says, I don't like to sell. Conflict is selling. And business all day long is you got to sell your idea, this idea, listen to some other stupid idea. Because to bring on an employee, I think you need your head examined first. Because that's one of the hardest things you can do. And with the laws and regulations today, bringing on employees I really don't recommend it. And the beauty of what Paul is saying with technology today, there's many things technology can do where you don't need to hire employees, which is the problem. So you really, I think the word is plan. Kim and I have a plan, and we stick to the plan. But the plan has got to be logical, and also find a mentor, somebody who's already done what you want to do, so it's a go-between between you and your partner. Because otherwise you're going to be looking for a new partner or be in a lawsuit like I always am with my charming personality. Okay, so it's not an easy thing, right, Kim?
Yeah, no, it's not an easy thing. And I would almost go back to basics, because when we look at with Robert and I and partners we've had in the past, the thing that killed it was when we were not aligned on the mission, when we were not aligned on the values of the business. So you might want to take a step back with your partner and re-examine what's the mission? Are we aligned? What are the values of the company? Are we aligned? And if not, that's a discussion that you two need to have, because already if you're having conflict over whether to hire employees or not, that problem's only going to get worse if you don't get to the root of the problem. So that would be my
and definitely get Paul Jarvis's book and discuss it with your partner. If the two of you do not want to read Paul's book and discuss it, you have a bigger problem. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question, Robert, comes from Justin in Denver. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He says, Robert, hi. I'm also of Japanese descent, and some of my morals and values include saving money. How can I get in the right mindset and switch it from a poor mindset to a rich mindset?
Well, first of all, there's nothing wrong with saving. It means you've earned more and spent less, which is a good trait today. But the thing is what's your purpose for saving? What are you going to use it for? And the reason I don't like saving money, as you know, is today we have negative interest rates and they're still printing money. I have a book coming out called Fake Money, Fake Teachers, Fake Assets. And they said, well, they stopped printing money. We're now in QT, quantitative tightening. But you understand the financial system, the whole system was designed to print money. It's called the fractional reserve system. They're always printing money. So there's nothing wrong with having savings, but you've got to have a purpose for it. To save money for more than a year is really ridiculous. It's a short It's money you should be putting somewhere, doing something else with. But if you don't know what to do with the money, like buy a stock or a mutual fund or bond or real estate, save it. There's nothing wrong with having a little extra cash, right?
No, that's exactly right. And going back to Paul's book and what you and I say, Robert, all the time is to start small. So if you have no financial education, saving might be the best place to go. But if you want to get a better return on your money, then start small. Put a few dollars into stocks or real estate or
gold or silver,
right? Yeah, go buy a 1 ounce silver coin.
Just understand that the whole financial system was
Start
rigged
small.
against savers. If you can understand that savers are losers because the system is rigged against you. Even if they stop printing money, the system is still rigged against you. That's really the hard thing for people to get. You're screwed. So that's why with the Rich Dad Radio Show, we don't tell you what to do. Kim and I combat saving by debt. We like borrowing money.
But we know how to handle debts.
Yeah, well, of course. But anyway, it's all about education, and please keep asking questions, keep looking at things. But savers are losers simply because if they stop printing money, the whole banking system is based on screwing savers. If you can get that through your head, and same as mutual fund guys and all that, you'll be fine. Okay? So once again, I thank Paul Jarvis, designer and author of the book, The Company of One. Please get that. I think the big lesson, you got to have a plan. Kim and I have plans generally for what we do, how we want to get to point A to point B. We don't always get there, but we have a plan. And Paul's book's The Company of One. His website is pjrvs.com. And you can submit your questions to Ask Robert at richdadradio.com. And thank you for listening to the Rich Dad Radio program.